Welcome to DBL. It is Wednesday, April 7th. I'm Sam here with Jeff and Lindsay, and we have a very special guest joining us remotely. Please welcome friend of the show, Dr. Drew Pinsky. Hey, Doc. So we don't have a lot of time.
How are you guys?
We're doing well.
Okay.
We're glad that you've joined us, and we don't have a lot of time with you, so we want to capitalize on everything that we can speaking to you. So I know that one of the first things that you yourself, Drew, wanted to talk about was something you said on our show. It was last year in February, just as the pandemic was starting to begin. Take a look. So, Dr. Drew, are we overreacting?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm hearing this from doctors left and right.
Yes, and we are not overreacting. The press is overreacting, and it makes me furious. The press should not be reporting medical stories as though they know how to report it. If we have a pandemic, I won't know how to tell that we're actually having a pandemic because everything is an emergency. People that are infectious disease specialists, the CDC, the epidemiologists, need to take this very seriously. The press needs to shut up.
All right, Dr. Drew, you did not mince words.
That was my point from the beginning, which is, and if you remember, what I followed with was listen to the CDC, let Dr. Fauci be your North Star. I said that 1,000 times, but somebody put together some video clips of me just saying the shut up part, essentially, and everyone forgot the rest of it. And that became some sort of national scandal because, God forbid, I should say, listen to the CDC. And I'll remind you now, I had an exchange with Alyssa Milano yesterday about this very issue because she brought all this up. And I said, look, if we had listened to the CDC and Dr. Fauci from the beginning, there would have been no lockdowns. There would have been limited school closures. There would have been, it would have been much, there would have been hopefully better testing done. But we didn't listen to the CDC. Every state went their own way. And now we're in a situation where there's profound mental health consequences. So exactly what I was afraid of 1 year ago there, here we are. Now we're dealing with drug overdoses, suicide, depression, people forced into poverty. Well done, everybody. And I'm still suffering the consequences of people claiming that I said something completely different. So thank you for bringing that up, Sam.
Now there's another controversy surrounding your name, Dr. Drew. And so I want us to be able to hash it out here on this show at this table. Vaccine passport. So New York has become the first state to formally launch a digital vaccine passport. It allows people to prove their vaccination status to get into events, to get into businesses. But on the other side, governors, including Texas's Greg Abbott, are rejecting the idea. Even the White House said that the federal government will not require vaccine credentials. You have weighed in on this also. You tweeted, quote, "These vaccine passports segregate people and strip them of their freedom to travel internationally. Vaccinations are important, and I encourage everyone to get the COVID vaccine. But how would you feel if international travel also required other vaccinations?" You followed it up saying this is about vaccine passports creating an outgroup, not whether or not other countries require vaccines. And your tweet definitely lit up Twitter. You brought up Alyssa Milano. She tweeted, "Requiring vaccination proof before travel will save lives. Most of the outgroups will be due to vaccine inequity, not passports." Focus there. And actor Jeffrey Wright responded saying it's about a measure to protect against the spread of infection, particularly critical in countries with already fragile healthcare systems. So, Dr. Drew, how do you feel about vaccine passports? And how did your tweet, because I have to be honest with you, you and I always call one another out. When I read that tweet, I was going, what are you thinking, Dr. Drew? What are you saying? Because I know your stance on vaccines. You are staunchly pro-vaccine.
Right. I'm not saying anything. I was not saying anything. I was asking a question, trying to get some engagement to see what people might feel if they were in that outgroup. I am in favor of passports. I'm getting my vaccine tomorrow in spite of being a COVID recovering patient with high levels of antibodies. I didn't say anything about my position. And of course, I know the sky is blue. I know that certain countries require certain kinds of vaccines, but the CDC actually breaks down travel into routine, suggested, and required. And there's very few required vaccines. So my question was, what if suddenly our travel was restricted by other countries, preventing us from moving about by requiring whatever they wanted to require? That was my question. I wasn't taking a position. You want my position? pro-vaccine, pro-passport. I think it's a good idea. But I've always worried that it created an out-group. Whenever you create an out-group, you're creating segregation. And I was worried about that. So I thought, how do other people feel? And people have lost their ability to read. It was a great exercise in fake news, because rather than reading what I was saying, the context of asking you a question, how would you feel if you were in the out-group, it became something totally different because they didn't read it. And then that became the fact, and then that became the fake news. It was a great example of how fake news is generated.
Well, Dr. Drew, speaking of fake news, I wanted to thank you, first of all, for talking to me. I think around this time last year, I was going through something personal. You jumped on a call with me, and we kind of worked our way through it. But my question kind of leads into that. Why continue to put this stuff on social media? Because you're never going to win. No matter how much you explain it, people are always out there to break you down or discredit what you're saying in some sort of way. Why continue to play that game?
You're I wouldn't call it a game. I feel like, as somebody in the media I'm trying to create some digital material, I'm trying to raise attention about that digital material. It's a necessary evil. It's a communication means that we're stuck with. I know for sure that there's going to be landmines, but what's so stunning to me is the most benign. My son actually composed the tweet. We talked about it in the morning. He sort of put it together, hey, what do you think about this? It was the most benign thing we can think of to try to get people to give us a little engagement. You see how locked and loaded people are, and how distorted they've made everything. So you're right. It's a cesspool. I'd love to be out of it. In fact, I find Instagram and TikTok to be much kinder environments. Twitter is I'm going to restrain myself from too strong language. It's a cesspool. It's disgusting, but I'm stuck there, and I have to use it for certain things. But maybe one day I'll get out. Like, Chrissy Teigen jumped out. Good for her. It's smart. It becomes beyond disgusting to deal with some of this.
Dr. Drew, people look to you as a doctor and an expert, and so whenever you put that out there, just like we look to Dr. Fauci, if you say something like, put a question out there, if Dr. Fauci would have done that, not calling you him, I think it will cause alarm for a lot of people. So seeing you write it as opposed to myself, a talk show host or a pedestrian, I think people are alarmed by you even having that stance and asking that question.
But I didn't take a stance. I was just wondering what people, in saying that there is such a thing as an out-group from the vaccine. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think it's a follow-up to the fact that we compared this to the flu early on, and that was your voice of reason. No, this has nothing to do with that. This has nothing to do with it. And by the way, I was comparing it to H1N1, which killed 300,000 people. I was wrong. And I was comparing it to the flu also, so people just could calm down and look at the data and sort of assess it for themselves. That was wrong. Comparing pandemics is the wrong thing to do. But that comparison I made for exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Then once we had more data, I updated my prior, much like Dr. Fauci did, adjusted course, listened to him, kept moving forward. 2 weeks, a year and 2 months ago. Come on, everybody. That's what medicine is. We're always updating our prior and adjusting ourselves.
Yeah, Dr. Drew, I feel like you got the raw end of the deal. I mean, I feel like people only hear what you say at one point, and then they don't let you evolve, just like other experts have evolved as well.
But they didn't even, but they're so locked and loaded, Sam, they didn't even hear what I said, which was, my point was, stop listening to the press, listen to the CDC, listen to Dr. Fauci. That was my point.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Drew, before we get into mental health, and even you being a COVID long hauler, I just want you quickly to button our previous conversation. Knowing that you have been in this controversial water now a couple of times, are you going to be more clear when you tweet, knowing the controversy and the pushback?
I was already trying to be that way, so I don't know how much clearer I can be when I ask a question that I'm asking a question and not making a statement. I don't know how to. I guess I have to, before I ask any questions on Twitter, I must give my opinion, I guess, which is something I'm trying not to do. I'm just going to see what people are thinking.
All right. Well, let's get to this next subject that I know that you have a strong opinion on. So a new study is out saying that 1 in 3 COVID survivors ended up being diagnosed with a brain or psychiatric disorder within 6 months. The most common ones were anxiety and depression. So, Dr. Drew, what's your take on this, and what do you think will be the lasting mental health effects of the pandemic on survivors?
when that tape you played of me a year ago, February, this is precisely what I was frightened about. This is what I could see coming. And if you look at the 1918 flu, Dr. Menninger, who was one of the most famous psychiatrists of the 20th century, he felt that by 1920, the majority of the psychiatric symptoms he was seeing was the result of the 1918 flu. And it's the full spectrum of psychopathology. It is not just depression, anxiety, though those predominate now. So you have not only the neurological effects, and even as I speak to you here, right, I've got ringing in my right ear, I have word finding difficulty, my working memory is a little shrunken, my sleep is disturbed. So I have very little long hauler symptoms, but I still have neurological symptoms. They are extremely common. And when you add to that the effect of not working, not going to school, locking down, isolating, substance use, we have a profound problem. And Dr. Fauci himself said, I believe we have a mental health pandemic underway, and he is right.
So, Dr. Drew, I want to ask you, I know you had your own battle with COVID. I had several family members that were battling COVID. What was that like for you? I mean, were you worried about some of these long-lasting effects?
You know, there was less talk about the long hauler syndrome back when I was sick. People asked me, was I afraid during COVID? But I had a 1% fatality rate, so I didn't even contemplate that. This is one of my Instagram lives where I was trying to share with people what I had learned about COVID and what you can do to stay out of the hospital. But I was not worrying about it at the time, but I became aware of the fact that 20% of people do have long hauler symptoms. And I'm going to tell you, they're no fun, they're no fooling, and we should be thinking much more about that and less about the fatality rates.
Yeah, and Dr. Drew, you know, you've been so supportive to my brother-in-law with COVID complications who's awaiting a double lung transplant, and I want to thank you for your advocacy on his behalf. We are hanging in. So, Dr. Drew, thank you for joining us. Yeah. Be sure to check out drdrew.com for podcasts and streaming shows. You can also find him on TikTok. We appreciate you clarifying your statements, Dr. Drew. We'll be right back.
Thanks, Doc.
You bet. Always great to see you guys.